So Antarctica is one of the driest, coldest, windiest places on the planet, and it's the least human-altered continent. The science is clear, as we've heard. The pathway is basically paved as far as what policies we need to implement. Now it's time to deliberate and have focused action on how we're going to actually turn the tide toward protection of this vital part of the planet. So although the Southern Ocean may feel far away from us right here in Sweden or anywhere else in the world, it doesn't lessen how deeply connected we are to that area and the marine ecosystems that exist there. Scientific research continues to be the leading charge as far as helping us understand how exactly fragile Antarctica really is and the wildlife that lives there. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Ari Friedlander, who has witnessed behavior changes of marine mammals who frequent the area around Antarctica, and he's got some observations to share.
I've had about a 25-year history working in the Antarctic to study whales and other marine mammals to try and understand their behavior and the impacts of human activity and climate change on those whales. My research in the Antarctic focuses on marine mammals and specifically baleen whales, trying to understand their behavior, their ecology, how they interact with other facets of their environment, and how they're impacted by human activities. The work that the Schmidt Ocean Foundation is funding specifically is to understand how whales were affected by pier construction along the Antarctic Peninsula. Effectively, how much did the sound that humans put into the environment affect the presence or the behavior or the communication of these whales? This research is adding to our overall information or understanding of whales in the Antarctic by telling us about how they respond to human activities, but also we're collecting data outside of when humans are active there. So we learn about how these animals do things in their natural setting. That can give us information to tell us about when things change, how animals are changing along with it. So some of the main findings that we've been able to make regarding whales in the Antarctic is that when they arrive from their tropical breeding grounds in December or January, they're absolutely famished and they start foraging almost immediately. For 24 hours a day, they're engorging on krill. They increase their body mass really, really quickly, and they do this throughout the season. The other thing that we've learned is that their movements are really dictated by where krill are throughout the season. From early in the season, they're distributed along the continental shelf, and then towards the end of the season, they move into these inshore bays and fjords like the Gerlache Strait, Wilhelmina Bay, and Anvord Bay on the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula. And this is particularly troubling because the Antarctic krill fishery is looking for those same krill at the same time of year. The whales are really good at finding these dense aggregations, and so is the fishery. So the potential for overlap and competition between whales and the fishery is really something we need to investigate further. It's critical that we maintain the balance in the marine ecosystem around the Antarctic for a number of reasons. First off, this is an ecosystem that should exist outside of our influence. We've done a lot from commercial whaling to krill fishing to climate change to impact this marine ecosystem. And it is so important to so many animals and to the global perspective of marine ecology and conservation that we owe it to the system and we owe it to ourselves that we do everything that we can to maintain the structure of this area. Listening to nature, listening to whales and other components of the ecosystem is important because it tells us about what the needs are of that system. It tells us how those things function, what the relationships are between animals and their environment. And that's important for us to learn because it gives us a better idea about what we need to protect, but it can also tell us a little bit about ourselves and how relationships between us and our environment or other humans can benefit from how animals in nature act with one another. Whales are a really important component of marine ecosystems because their presence reflects all of these emergent properties of the ocean that have to come together in order to sustain whales. Because they eat so much food, you need to have primary production, you need to have secondary production, and all the things that lead up to being able to have whales there. The presence of whales, especially in large numbers, really relates to the proper functioning of a marine ecosystem. And we need to be able to understand that, to acknowledge it, and then also to be able to do things to maintain that. It's really important that we give oceans rights. I think marine ecosystems, all of nature has a voice, and it needs to be heard. Not only for the heuristic value of nature living on its own for its own reasons, but we benefit from nature. We do better when nature exists in a way that we can enjoy it, that we can respect it, and that we can learn from it. Listening to nature is critical because It tells us what these places need, what these ecosystems need, and how our activities are impacting them both in a positive way and in a negative way. The proposed marine protected areas have a huge potential to really have a positive impact on the marine ecosystem and specifically on the animals that rely on krill. By finding areas that are important to these animals and saying that we can't do certain things in those areas is a first step towards minimizing our impacts and allowing these animals and the marine ecosystem to function in the way that it should.
Here at the Ocean Race Summits, we're raising the voice of the ocean because we want to raise the profile of ocean rights and other initiatives like Relay for Nature and help give the ocean a seat at the table for people who want to listen to the ocean's needs and specifically listening to the ocean needs at very important conferences like Stockholm Plus 50 meeting tomorrow. One particularly important table that we all must pay attention to as well is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, or CAMLAR. Tonight, we are honored to have CAMLAR's chairperson joining us, Dr. Jakob Granit. He's also the Director General at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. And we also have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Swedish Ambassador for the Ocean, Ms. Helen Ugrian. Did I get that right? Almost. From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Would love to welcome both of you to the stage. Thank you. So let's first start out, Helen, if it's okay. I would like to start with you. Given that Sweden is holding the rotating biannual CAMLAR chair and having the chair here, Jakob Granit, with us right now, these have been very difficult years, dealing with things within CAMLAR, which probably also it's affected by the war in Ukraine, which Isabella mentioned earlier. What are the political, diplomatic priorities that Sweden has set itself regarding polar areas of the global ocean to protect? Sorry, that was not a clear question, but essentially, what's Sweden's next action?
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me here. Well, I would like to start off with saying that the Swedish government is really committed to the full Agenda 2030 and the 17 SDGs. And we have all heard here today that all life on the planet depends on a healthy ocean. So, and also that the Southern Ocean plays a key role in climate regulation, in the global ocean circulation and the distribution of nutrients. And in Antarctica, we have some very unique species. So the government is really concerned that we haven't really we are lagging behind when it comes to SDG 14 to protect the ocean and life below water, and in particular 14.5, where we have decided that we should protect 10% of the ocean by 2020. So we haven't reached that, but agreeing on the three proposals on marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean would actually make us reach that 10% target, which is a really important step also to be able to agree under the new global biodiversity framework on a new, more ambitious target to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. So the government supports that. But coming back then to the intentions with the presidency of the of CAMLAR, and these years, which, as you said, have been difficult, it is actually to restore and improve the spirit of constructive cooperation and to ensure respect for international law and science-based decision-making. So this has been put to the test, not in the least of the light of the in the light of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And as we have pointed out here today, international collaboration and decision by consensus is never stronger than the weakest link. So that's the fact, and now it's really important to stick to the rules and procedures of the whole Antarctic treaty system, to continue to collaborate on science and continue the dialogue and to build consensus and strong coalitions with other parties.
Jakob, what else do you think is realistic, given the present political situation that we just commented on? What do you expect to achieve this year, as this is your final year as chairman of CAMLR? And is there some diplomatic key that you think will unlock something at present when it comes to the protection of Antarctica and the Southern Ocean?
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me here. It's quite humbling, actually, because I think you put together such a wonderful session here with all the different perspectives that we are listening to. Sailing, racing, oceans, marine science, and really the purpose of why we're trying to collaborate and make change. So thanks for that. I think, from the perspective, I represent not one government, or represent the 27 governments right now collaborating within CAMLR, and so that's the position I currently have. So I think one very important issue that we need to focus on and work on this year and continuously is partly what we heard our colleague from the Pew say earlier today, and that is that we have a very unique governance system in place with the Antarctic Treaty from 1959, with the Antarctic Seals Convention from 1972, further on the Madrid Protocol on the Protection of the Environment, and then CAMLR. And this makes up a very, very important governance, regional governance framework that actually covers 10% of the areas beyond national jurisdiction in our common oceans. So I brought this to you just to show. These are the conservation measures that are put together over 40 years of work, international work, by these 27 member states.
Wow.
And these over 100 conservation measures, they are really very, very detailed in terms of where you can fish, for example, what gear you can use, how cameras are used, what areas are protected, when and where you can fish, how science supports all the decision-making, and monitoring systems, how catch trading schemes, as we heard earlier, so that you can trade all these environmental products that you get out of the oceans. So it's really a unique system. And I think what we really need to do now and for the future is to ensure that we preserve these systems. So as the ambassador just said, we have to keep on the momentum and the spirit of collaboration, even though we are in such difficult times right now geopolitically, because we have created a system which actually protects the southern oceans and provides opportunities for rational use. And I think we need to bear in mind that in the 60s and the 70s, almost all the Antarctic seals were extinct. The whales that we just heard about were more or less extinct. Now these species have returned. So there's also cause for celebration. We have done something. We have provided action. Now that's not the same thing as if or not we can manage the overall climate change issue, because that's more of a global issue. But in that region, these over 100 conservation measures have made a terrific change. So I think that's part of my ambition, at least, to keep that going for the time. And then more specifically, we heard also earlier today, there are now detailed scientific work going on to establish a new krill management strategy. So that is, where can you fish? How can you fish? So to avoid that situation that we heard before, that you have fishing vessels at the same area as the whales are also foraging. So these are now very detailed work going on. Last year, they moved over, and now we hope that we can have an agreement on this, because it's very, very important to ensure that krill is fished at the right spot if we're going to fish that. So that's important. And then also last year at the CAMLR, we had a decision which I think all members should be very proud about, and that was to agree on on a special meeting, an extraordinary session that would lay out the roadmap for how we can get to these 3 new MPAs. And bearing in mind, again, the old protective framework is like a super marine protected area, but you must go down. You must deepen that protection, and that's also why these 3 MPAs have been there. But right now, there is no consensus. So we have to find a way to create that consensus. So in the spirit of multilateral collaboration, the path is now there, and I think we're almost at an agreement on the terms of reference for that procedure. And then hopefully it can be done either before the main meeting in October, November, or subsequently. bearing in mind the situation that we are at right now. And then also, like in these type of organizations, there are very, very sensitive issues related to fishing in some certain areas. Last year, one member state blocked agreement on a consensus for a fishing quota in a certain region where there are sovereign disputes. And this is something we have to work on together with the member state to resolve. Otherwise, a meeting like the next meeting can be fully occupied by one issue only, and that is, can you fish, can you not fish, whose right is it, whose right is it not? Underlying that are sovereign issues. So there are a number of these things that we need to bear in mind, but I think the most important message from me is to ensure we keep up this good work and make sure it continues, and I think it's exactly in line with what the ambassador just said. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I have a lot of follow-up questions there. So in terms of the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, the national jurisdiction that coastal communities, coastal countries and nations have, they preside over the 200 miles from their coastline, and then we hit the high seas. With Antarctica, it's such a unique situation because it's not inhabited, quote unquote, right? And so it's kind of a wild west of figuring out what works, and that's exactly why CAMLAR was established. But my main question is, with conservation being the main term within the title of the agreement, why is it that fishing is still kind of an option rather than it being completely about conservation?
Yes, we talked about that question. I think it's a very interesting question because at the end, it's about what member states can agree and also what they want. There was a question earlier addressed to the former Prime Minister on why countries are behaving in certain ways, and because they have interests. They have interest, and when it comes to fishing, there are interests that relate to. There are economical ones that play a major role here. There are food security ones that also play a very important role, and I think there are also traditional perspectives to this. It's sort of in the DNA of many countries to do these fishing in faraway areas. We heard earlier, we had Swedish researchers, Otto Nordenskjöld, that we heard about earlier this day. He went there and looked into these areas. They looked for, discoveries, but they also looked for minerals. They also looked for seals to hunt. I mean, so these are drivers. So I would argue they are partly cultural, partly economical, and also for some members, they are related to food security. A lot of that krill is used for fish feed into fish farms in many countries globally, and that goes into as a food security element. So these are all things that come together. But at the bottom line of the CAMLAR, and as the convention was set up, was that you can have a sustainable use, not drawing down on these resources. And you can have an ecosystem approach, which actually was developed within CAMLAR, which we are now, I would argue, trying to replicate in our own Baltic Sea and so forth. We have quite far to go. But there are some very, very important aspects here. So if you want to strike a balance here, there are member states that have legitimate reasons, they argue, for fishing. There are other ones that have legitimate reasons for protection and conservation, and we have to meet. And from my point of view, as the chair of the organization, and as the science says, we can probably meet.
So let's see. So back to you, Helen, Ambassador. Although there's a frequently declared dual priority of protection and sustainable use of ocean resources, would you be able to elaborate on which principle would take priority in the case of conflict of interest or in doubt? So more specifically, would Sweden champion the idea of ocean rights, that we've mentioned many times today, thus reversing the burden of proof on those who maybe want to exploit the area for resources?
Well, Sweden and the Swedish government is a staunch supporter of multilateralism, rules-based world order, and that is based on international law, including the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. So under UNCLOS, all states have already the obligation to protect and preserve marine environment, and that also applies for the Southern Ocean. So we really need to secure and safeguard and support the implementation of these regulations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And Jakob, as the chair of CAMLAR, how do you think that ocean rights can contribute to CAMLAR proposals in the future and the current situation in the Southern Ocean?
I think it's critically important because at the end, I think what you're doing here is raising people's awareness about the situation. So we call it, some people call it today ocean literacy, and I guess this is what it's all about. I was happy to, as the Director General, sign also that baton earlier in Marseille, and because I do think it's important, and because many people, it's far away. Antarctica is far away. The Baltic Sea for us here is also quite far away because as humans we don't have a very close connection. We feel it and we want to be there, but it's hard for people to have access. So this type of discussions about the rights, making people aware, is very, very important because it puts pressure on, as Isabella Levin said, on politicians to do more. And I think at the end, if organizations like CAMLAR and the treaty system is going to function and work, it means that those people representing the member states also have to be very well prepared. Mm-hmm. They also have to invest in going to this meeting, read up and understand the issues. It's quite complicated material. And some member states that have worked on this for years, they're extremely well prepared. And some of us perhaps come, with high ambitions, not so prepared, and that doesn't move anywhere. So I think these discussions on rights are important. The question is, how do you develop those rights? And you develop them by being prepared, by reading up, understanding, and in that case, I think it's important. So maybe legal issues with something for your for your future seminar summits to talk about.
Absolutely. I agree. I think we should include more of that because it is complicated and hard to navigate. But if we have a map that we can all share and having, folks like you with us to explain it is very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate that. I think what I'd love to end with is Sweden's legacy from your point of view as chairman, as well as an ambassador. What are you hoping for in the next few years as far as what people will remember, how Sweden led the way through CAMLAR's work? And then also, I would love it if each of you would share your personal vision for the ocean in 2030. Kind of paint the picture for us. What are you hoping for your loved ones, maybe your children, grandchildren, future generations? What do you hope to see? And I'd love to start with you, Helen.
All right. Well, I really hope that this year will be the year when we are moving on the MPAs, and there are planning for some meetings to as Jakob told about, to look at the roadmap and how to make that happen. So that would be really nice. And in the European Union, we have been working closely with the Commission and the other member states to grow the number of co-proponents for these MPAs. So we would really like to see movement there. And when it comes to sort of the vision, I would like to maybe it's more of a shift of mind that we have been also been touching on here, that we have a healthy ocean with abundance of life, which we look at and treat with respect and humility, and as a unifying space, and not a space to conquer with resources up for grabs. So that's my sort of mind shift vision.
I love that. Yes, well, it's clear. It's very clear. And for me, I think asking about vision is important because as we talk about the challenges and the problems that we're facing in the moment, we also need to put equal energy into creating the vision of what we actually want and what we hope for in the future. And the more that we verbalize it, the more that we say it out loud, I think the faster we can actualize it. So, Chairman, what's your vision?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps a little bit early for me to talk about legacy, since we
sure.
still have a couple of months left of this position as chair, as Swedish chair in CAMLAR. But if I dare to say something, I hope a small country like Sweden that we can be recognized for having kept momentum in spite of having a very difficult pandemic, extremely hard for countries just to meet and have dialogues. So that's one important thing. And also not forgetting that 2 members are currently in a major conflict, and that started just a couple of months back. So in spite of those 2 things, that we have been able to keep the discussions and the dialogue going, and the science going, the proper decisions going. I think this important. I hope it will be a legacy. I hope. I don't know yet, but I hope it will be a legacy. And then also, I hope that we have in place a clear roadmap for how we can achieve those 3 further MPAs that we talked about, marine protected areas. Because again, it's deepening the current framework, doing more and better protection. So I hope really a legacy will be that roadmap is decided upon and members are pursuing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, both. I really appreciate both of you for being here. Helen, Jakob, thank you. We look forward to seeing how your essential work will continue to influence the protection of Antarctica, and hopefully we'll get there together. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight at the Ocean Race Summit Stockholm. It's been an honor being your host tonight. Again, my name is Danni Washington. I also want to thank all of our fantastic speakers that came up here. It takes a lot to sit on a stage under a bunch of lights with a mic. Relating back to Stockholm Plus 50, which is starting tomorrow, if you are going to this event and this meeting, please take what you learned today with you and share it and continue to fight for our ocean. I think the 2030 agenda in regards to Stockholm Plus 50 includes lots of great ideas, including, of course, restoration. We need reciprocity. We need people interacting with people connecting with nature. We need to recognize this planet as our only home, really, whether it provides for us or for other non-human inhabitants. And for this generation and future generations, it's our right to have a healthy planet, a healthy future, and a healthy environment. I also hope that you will support in your own way the establishment of the 3 additional MPAs within Antarctica, around Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. I also hope that you listen to nature. When you go outside later, listen, look around, feel it. And then also, SDG 14, very important conversation at Stockholm Plus 50. How can we set targets, new targets that are going to help us achieve the goals that we hope to achieve that are already set, but beyond that, we know that the time is now. I'd like to thank 11th Hour Racing, who's our premier partner for the Ocean Race and also a founding partner of our sustainability program. And if you want to take a quick action that you can do right on your phone, your smartphone, or once you get home on a web browser, you can go to only.one online and sign the petition to protect Antarctica. They've got a great campaign, so please sign that when you have an opportunity.